Welcome to this next session on Who's Going to Crack the Code. My name is Nick Rocky from Trilog. I'll be facilitating this session. I'm joined by three very knowledgeable panelists, but before we go into their background and introduce them. So before we go into their background, just to remind you of the processes or how you can engage this forum. Firstly, there's a chat and a Q&A and a poll functionality, and these are to the right of your screen. If you can't see all three, you can just refresh your app and it'll bring all those three functions up. The chat functionality is for comments and conversation on the content. We will attend to this and we'll look at it, but we won't be watching the chats as we go through from a facilitation point of view. So please put your questions on the Q&A and we will try and get to them and attend to them as we go through. And then there will be a poll. I'll introduce that shortly, and then you can put the answers down there. Okay, so just to introduce the panelists very briefly, we've got Onyi Nanwari, who is from Africa Tikkun and has really looked at the approach of upgrading skills, matching skills for the job market. Dr. Fidelis Hove has worked with the supported hundreds of job creation projects through his work with the National Treasury's 9 billion Rand Jobs Fund, which has been launched and run since 2011. And Tashma Ismail Saville, who you would have seen at the last session, is employed with the YES service, Youth Employment Service. Their CVs are on the program. I'm not going to go through the detail of the CVs. But just to alert you that they are there, and it's worth looking at them just to give you a sense of the depth of experience that these panelists bring to the table. So I'm going to just open up the conversation with literally an introductory statement from each of the panelists. Actually, before we do that, sorry, I'm going to just go to the poll, and if you can just have a look in your time while the panelists are going through the introductory statements, and you can just answer the poll question. And the poll question reads as follows: which of the following stakeholders do you believe has the most influence in enabling job creation? And one answer only, please. Government through policy change, business through creating work opportunities and skills, or civil society through skills and education development interventions. So we'll put the answers up to this a bit later and discuss it. Clearly, it's difficult putting one answer to that, but we'd just like you to think about what the most influential of those stakeholders, which of those stakeholders is most influential. So I'm going to go across now to Onyi and just ask her to comment based on her experience on Africa Tikkun's service approach of upgrading and matching individual skills in partnership with potential employers, and to comment that is your model ultimately constrained by the state of the economy and work opportunities, or is upgrading of skills a worthy end in itself? Does that actually create pathways to employability as opposed to employment, which is a worthy end in itself? So if you can come up with an opening statement and a perspective on that, that'd be great. Thank you, Onyi.
Thank you, Nick. I'd like to start off by commenting that Africa Tikkun is known for its Cradle to Career 360 model. Our model gives lives to our vision of enabling young people to become economically empowered. If you want to know what Cradle to Career is a comprehensive approach to child and youth development that considers the needs of each young person we encounter as they progress through the different stages of their lives. So we take young people from preschool to primary school to high school and to post-matric, and then into economic empowerment, which means into skills and then into employment. Our offering as Africa Tikkun Services comprises of a unique set of programs and support services that we design to make sure that we counter the effects of poverty and inequality. In this way, we are actively working towards the reduction of youth unemployment in a sustainable manner. Our goal as Africa Tikkun and Africa Tikkun Services is to end youth unemployment in our lifetime, if not reduce it. And so if you look at our programs are really targeted at providing unemployed youth with a holistic support and skills system that allows them to access opportunities that will develop them into participating economic players. And our aim is really, like I've mentioned, to break the cycle of poverty. And the fundamental differentiator of Africa Tikkun Services program is that we leverage 26 years of building an ecosystem that invests in young people, networks, and social capital to facilitate the economic empowerment of young people into income generating opportunities. Our programs are really focused on meeting South Africa's developmental priorities as well as the sustainable development goals. And the goals that we are looking at in particular is goal number 1, which is no poverty, goal number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. We recognize that the pandemic has amplified the inequalities and the gaps these create from a skills perspective. It has forced the acceleration of digital transformation where people now have to unlearn skills that they have learned previously or reskill themselves or upskill themselves out of necessity. And the truth is that it's impossible to predict the magnitude of the contraction of the economy due to the lockdown and the pandemic. Therefore, solving the unemployment crisis requires collaboration amongst various sectors, which can complement each other's efforts. It starts with us, with committed funders who are intentional about supporting human capital development, skills development, and placement initiatives. And then to government, from a government perspective, we need to, like you've mentioned, Nick, have government that contributes through incentives that encourage employers to take calculated risks and reform HR practices that will enable and accommodate young job seekers or job seekers in general in their workplace. We also need training providers or civil societies who can focus on holistic development programs that will develop the character and confidence of young people, as well as skills development programs that will ensure job readiness, as well as demand-driven training. From a business perspective, we believe that business needs to create opportunities for youth through workplace skills placements, job opportunities, and mentoring opportunities. And I think, my colleague Yash will agree Tash would agree that, and as well as my colleague from Jobs Fund will agree that, the more we get enabling environments that enable companies to start welcoming more job seekers in their environment on a targeted basis will really help solve the problem. But finally, there's also a role for the youth themselves who need to be motivated and committed to the programs that we're all working on. From an ATS perspective, our role is to coordinate the various sectors to create skills empowerment and economic opportunities for job seekers. When it comes to innovation for job creation, we believe it's already taking place and can be found in efforts to stimulate and create jobs in the gig economy. There's now a huge talk around gig economy, digital jobs. Secondly, there's a lot of effort to begin to look at jobs globally. It's no longer about South Africa creating its own jobs. People can skill themselves and position themselves as employees or independent contractors that can solve problems in support of company objectives from any location in the world. And I think Africa is uniquely positioned to start seeing job creation, not just from a South African perspective, but that if we give people the right skills that will help them to work anywhere in the world, they can. And companies like Microsoft has launched something called the Global Skills Initiative, where they have used the LinkedIn economic graph and they've identified the top 10 in-demand skills that employers are looking for. And they're now reskilling people to enable that. But more importantly, we also need to start encouraging our job seekers to become problem solvers, solution drivers, so that we can start having in our countries a solution-driven workforce that encourages citizens to identify economic, social, and environmental problems in their communities, in their suburbs, in their cities, and so that we start seeing social enterprises that are being developed to respond to these problems. And if we're able to get high net worth individuals and venture capitalists to be a lot more open around not just the traditional entrepreneurs, but also around social entrepreneurship, then we'll begin to see a lot more innovation in job creation. And then finally, if we want to see innovative job creation, we need to start exploring how we can break down barriers to entry for startup companies. Startup companies are still the most, for the most part, the real job creators in our economy. You know, how do we encourage innovation and job creation through supporting startups? How do we enable entrepreneurs and small businesses to start being a lot more aggressive in relation to growing their businesses and therefore creating jobs? So in conclusion, we believe that the only way to start seeing innovation in job creation is not a single bullet. It's a collaborative approach, but it's also beginning to think out of the box and looking at all the role players who can enable that. Thank you.
Thanks, Anya. Thank you very much for that. Fidelis, over to you. The Jobs Fund has supported hundreds of job creation projects over its time. Can you share any interventions around what in particular, what common aspects typically apply that work for job creation, and those that where the typical mistakes are often made, common mistakes? And maybe refer to any interventions that sort of stand out as highly successful. It's a big question. You've only got a few minutes, but maybe you can touch on some of those points.
Yeah, big question indeed. Thank you so much, Nick. So I'll start with a bit of context in terms of the Jobs Fund history. So we were set up in 2011 with two objectives. The first one was to co-finance and test innovative approaches to employment creation, and then share those models in a way that informs public policy. The second objective, of course, was we were given a target of 150,000 jobs to create while running these experiments. So we're capitalized initially with 9 billion, and that money has now been fully allocated to various partners. We've got about 151 of them working across all sectors and regions in the country. Since inception, we've actually delivered 181,000 permanent jobs at an average cost per job of 28,000. So I think if you've seen some of these numbers, you would agree with me that that's a fairly competitive return. We've also managed to increase the pool of funding available to beneficiaries by catalyzing private sector funding. So to date, for each 1 rand of funding provided by the Jobs Fund, an additional 2 rand has been crowded in from third parties. And this is corporates and some of our civil society partners as well. I'll now talk a bit about our experience in terms of the actual projects we've implemented. So we've been allocating funding through 4 main funding windows. The first funding window is the Enterprise Development Funding window. I think the name speaks for itself. So these are projects that aim to stimulate the demand for labor by supporting firms primarily. Some of the successful projects or partners we've funded under this funding window include the likes of A2Pay, which supports spaza shops in townships, Black Umbrellas. We've got a partnership with Business Partners, which is a franchising model. I'll also add that a lot of our initiatives in the agricultural sector fall under this funding window. And examples include our partnership with Cernic Group in the Free State that's developing emerging commercial Black farmers. The Urban Agriculture Initiative that is helping young urban farmers grow produce on rooftops in Joburg's inner city. The last 2 projects have successfully demonstrated how you can harness technology to bring young people into agricultural production, which I think is an important thing. We also have under the enterprise development portfolio, social enterprises such as Smart Start. I think they had a session earlier where they were speaking to the fantastic work they're doing in terms of early childhood development. So you can actually combine job creation with social impact. I think that's one of the things that funding window has shown us. We also have the support for work seekers funding window. That's for programs that link active work seekers, especially young people, to formal and informal sector opportunities. One of the most successful partners under this funding window include the likes of Arambe, which I think will feature quite prominently at this event. The third funding window is the infrastructure investment funding window, which is really for light infrastructure investments that directly enhance investment in job creation. So examples of this include the River Sands Incubation Hub, the Nissan AIDC Automotive Incubation Center, the Learning Center we built in East London with Mercedes-Benz. The final type of projects we fund are institutional capacity building type of projects. These are aimed at strengthening institutions through which support can be provided that leads to further job creation. So an example of this would be some of the support we've provided to microfinance institutions, support we've provided to savings cooperatives, and the likes, village saving banks. To save time, I think in terms of speaking to some of the lessons learned so far, I'll just focus on the enterprise development funding window because we've been running this fund for 9 years. So there's a lot I could speak to, but I think we'll take that under the Q&A if any questions arise. So I'll speak primarily to what we've learned in trying to support small businesses. I'll focus on 4 broad points. The first point is what we've learned in terms of support packages. So in order for small enterprises to grow employment, we've actually realized that firstly, the support needs to be comprehensive. You can't do one of 6 or 4 or 5 things that an entrepreneur actually needs. It needs to be comprehensive, but most importantly, it needs to be needs-based. So there has to be an analysis of what the business actually requires, and then you make sure you provide that appropriately. And there are 5 key elements that we've seen that cut across all the interventions we've had in terms of success factors. So interventions that provide technical and business skills training and mentorship, especially the psychological coaching and those kind of elements, have been very successful. So that's the first point. The second point is provision of business support services. So we take for granted, how difficult it is for small businesses to comply with certain requirements. So legal support, accounting, and all those services are critical. The third element would be different types of infrastructure, so be it for production, but also office space. The fourth element would be market linkages. And then the fifth one is access to finance. But in most debates around how to support small businesses, I think this tends to dominate the other 5 elements, yet all elements are equally important. The second component I want to speak to is the debate that's been around business incubators. So we've funded quite a number of them. And we have found that they're quite effective in terms of addressing unemployment by reducing early stage failure rates. But successful ones have tended to do 3 things very well. The first one is they focus on growth sectors. I think there was a time when a lot of incubators were filled with SMMEs in catering, for example, especially if you're in Gauteng. But opportunities tend to get limited. So there has to be an intentional focus on selecting the right sectors for growth. The second element would be obviously making sure that you screen the entrepreneurs. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. And our support ecosystem, especially for youngsters, needs to be comprehensive enough that it provides different entry points for different kinds of youngsters based on their needs and abilities. The third element would be going back to the 5 key support ecosystem components I mentioned. Those have to be part of any successful incubator. I'll then speak to a third component, which is me zoning in on the access to funding debate. Throughout,
just I'll speed it up. If you
yeah.
just close up, thanks. Sorry.
I think I'll close up with the access to funding issue, but because it's been very topical. So I think through our credit guarantee models, we've actually discovered that a lot of SMMEs that are typically deemed not fundable can be funded. But I think there's a lot of debate now about how you actually implement these credit guarantee mechanisms, given what's happened with the credit guarantee initiative started by government recently. We've also implemented blended funding models, which have lowered interest rates charged to entrepreneurs. But again, these need to be combined with the other elements of enterprise support that I mentioned earlier. In terms of market gaps, as I wrap up, I think there are two critical market gaps that we've identified in terms of access to funding. There's a huge gap in terms of innovation capital. So there's an opportunity for government to enhance current incentives to encourage equity, business angel finance, or formal venture capital transactions. The second component or second point around this is we really need to do more in terms of strengthening non-bank financial institutions. I mentioned earlier some of the work we've tried to do with micro-lending institutions, village banks, etc. Those are important, especially if you want to target marginalized groups. I think I'll end there
Thank you
for
very
now.
much. I think that's.
But 9 years is a long time.
And I mean, you just stressed how complex the space is and how such a holistic approach is required in terms of the kind of work and the complexities about getting involved in the space. But I'm going to just now ask Tashmia just to come in and really comment on her work with the YES program in terms of getting people ready for the world of work. And on the success of the program, but then importantly on, what is a job? A job is something that you can put someone into a position for how long? Indefinitely or for a year? And just ask Tashmia to comment on the sustainability of work or the conversion rates of people that have had work experience back into the job market.
Great. So thank you. So the Youth Employment Service is, I think, innovative in that it's an operational plan between government and business. So we're an NPO. We operate with a policy that was made by the DTIC on the codes of good practice. So if a company invests in youth work opportunities, they're able to move 1 or 2 levels up on the BE scorecard. But companies are investing in the job. So it's a lovely give from both sides. The Youth Employment Service acts as that bridge. We're a platform. We've built ourselves around a platform business that collects businesses. We've got 1,150 businesses on the platform that are registered, investing in these youth jobs. And then we have partners on the other side of the platform that we hook these businesses into. In some cases, the businesses are placing youth themselves. And in other cases, we've been able to curate a list of high impact programs around the country. ONI belongs to one of them. It's Africa Tikkun. We have a vetting process where we look at the types of quality work experiences that these partners will put youth into. These range from early childhood development, like the Smart Start program that was described, ONI's program at Tikkun. We've got youth in recycling, conservation, in sectors that we deem high growth or that have much needed impact at community level. By getting companies to sponsor these jobs and funneling that funding through to organizations on the ground, we're able to create these work opportunities for youth closer to where they live. So some of these structural issues around entry-level jobs and being able to create jobs closer to home, negating the transport costs, trying to keep young mothers with their kids. This implementation partner model helps us to allow corporates to have the sort of impact they need at an entry level. We've got this issue in our first economy where the skills in demand by big business, which in our incredibly consolidated first economy, means there aren't a lot of jobs in the first place. And when they do open up, they're for highly skilled individuals. And of course, there's a huge mismatch because if you look at the unemployment problem in the country, it's sitting with entry-level workers. Most youth don't have a matric certificate, or 54% of youth going into the labor market don't have a matric certificate. So this model allows us to get youth into that first work experience. Now, you need economic growth. If you are going to say to a company, we want you to hire someone and put them on a permanent employment contract, you need business confidence up, and we know where business confidence is at the moment. So the next best pragmatic step is to say, can you help break them into the jobs market? Can you allow them this opportunity to experience the psychology and dignity that goes with that first job opportunity that it is for you? Allow them to get de-risked through a work experience, to say, I've got a CV and reference letter. Our absorption rate ranges between 21 and 30%. This depends on what company has finished, because the absorption rates change the averages on a daily basis. And for those youth that aren't absorbed, we're allowing them to exit with something on that CV and reference letter, which is massive currency. Now, everything that we do, we've looked at peer-reviewed research to understand what we base this on. And there's several papers that talk about the importance and the significance of a reference letter. For women, a reference letter doubles the likelihood of a job, not a callback, a job, within 3 months of active search. So they're powerful markers of productivity that come through that reference letter. Now, globally, what we know, this is not a South African phenomenon, this is global. Employers will hire from the pool of the employed, or someone who just has been employed, because it is such a strong marker of productivity, and they don't want to get caught up in the loss of resources by going through labor processes. So dismissal costs are a huge factor in why young people don't get given that chance to get into that first work experience. And this is why you'll hear young people saying, well, I can't get a job without experience, and I can't get experience without a job. And so this idea of this bridging of getting youth a foot in the door is quite a powerful sort of push for them to just equalize the playing field somewhat. Because the way our economy is structured, structurally, if you look at the way our education system is structured, if you look at role modeling, if you look at young people, 40% are growing up in homes where there's no working adult. So, you've got to have some kind of national strategy that says, I will break you in. Here's a way to break you in. And it's private sector funded. We've got 2.16 billion in salaries that have gone through these youth wallets. It's today, I think we hit the 40,000 work opportunities mark. So even without the whole, if we take the year-long work experience out of the equation, those salaries matter. 2.16 billion in 20 months going to 40,000 youth is a decent number. And of course, we're using this carrot of policy to drive this private sector investment. And so that's the space we're playing in. We've got this hub strategy where we find high growth sectors. We look at demand. So we see a big demand for drone pilots, for example. And so we have funders at our hubs, which are infrastructure that allows for this knowledge spillover into communities to be able to create the skills. But we make sure there's the demand first, and then we drive programs like this drone program. We've got one in hospitality. We've got a range of them. And funders can also place their youth into work experiences, 3D printing models. Fidelis, we've also got commercial agri-tunnels, hydroponics tunnels that we're setting up. So getting youth that year-long work experience can also happen at the hubs in these programs that are setting them up for sectors where we know that there is demand for that skill. So those are the two ways in which YES is working. There's a two-pronged strategy around YES Central, which is workplace-based experience, but sometimes that workplace-based experience is through organizations like Smart Start and Tikkun, and sometimes it's at the hub via the work inside of those businesses where they're gaining the skills to be able to do that on their own or for an employer.
Thanks so much. That's a great summary. Thanks. I'm just going to see if there's a result from the poll that came up. Are we able to see what that looked like? Tech guys can come up and show us what came out of the poll. There we go.
That's interesting.
Okay, so government through policy change seen as the most influential stakeholder, followed by business creating work opportunity. And interestingly, that we've got these civil society programs which are making such an impact and doing such good work, but yet we see that the perception is that they have the least amount of influence ultimately in creating creating additional work opportunities. Any comments on that from the panel, just as it relates to your own environment? And there was a question that came through the Q&A line around, the role of government in enabling or reducing red tape to enable this. But any quick comments on the results of the poll? Do you agree with it? Do you think that it's difficult, because obviously it's impacted by all of those factors? But any interesting observations on what's come through there? Anyone want to go?
So, I mean, I can't argue with it, because the yes opportunities have been created, I think, largely because we've been able to say there's a sustainable model here. You get something for your investment. My sense of the civil society organizations getting the lower number of votes is their functionality is entirely dependent on grant funding. And how, it's difficult to say you move the playing field when the market economics are not helping you along. And the thing about policy change is it makes it easier for the investors in jobs to participate, or it should, if you do the right type of policy change. And I think that's where you're going to get the most scaled changes. I mean, I did a poll like this on social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter, asking a very similar question for businesses coming out of COVID. What would help them best survive and thrive? Was it access to capital? And sure, people are capital starved. You would imagine that would be a big one. Was it access to markets? Or was it reduction in red tape and policy change? And overwhelmingly, the answer was reduction in red tape and policy change. So that seems to be where people are struggling, and would be the biggest motivator to small businesses, I imagine, in being able to create those jobs, because we can't create them in a fake way. We've got to have the market generating these jobs.
Yes.
And my sense is that's, policy is the way to go to enable that.
Yeah. I'm going to just leave that. Would you like to comment, Annie?
Yes, I'd like to comment. I think yes is a big demonstrator that if the right policy is in place, business will play along and jobs will be created. It really shows the hierarchy between policy, businesses partnering with that policy, and then we've seen a significant shift in that. So I definitely agree with the poll, but however, I believe that the poll has underscored the enabling environment created by the not-for-profit or civil society sector. Without those sectors, there's nobody there would not be the raw material or the talent pipeline into the corporates as a starting point. There will be nothing to employ. Or even if what is employed, then there will be huge costs to get what is being employed to become productive within the business environment. So I do want to challenge the understanding around civil society and the impact it actually makes. And it's very understated, but without it, I fear that we will be in a very worse position.
No, thank you. And I think to the theme of the conference, clearly the partnerships are critical, and not one player can actually solve this problem alone, and a combination or a cooperative relationship between partners and stakeholders is necessary. I want to ask, just put another question out there around how do we measure, are there any sort of standard benchmarks around what it costs to create a job, what good practice looks like, how long and what sort of earnings these jobs are able to generate? And maybe Fidelis, I mean, do you track across your different programs? Are there some critical indicators that you would use to judge a successful program? And can these be applied whether you are upskilling someone to go into a work environment versus setting up a small business based on potential demand? Any comments on just benchmarking and tracking this whole process?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think the first point to make about that question is that the whole exercise of measuring efficiency and effectiveness really needs to be understood in a way that you can't easily generalize. different interventions and programs actually approach the solution in different ways. So you need to have a nuanced approach to looking at what you measure. I'll take the issue of cost per job, for example. We've had numerous debates on how to measure a cost per job. The reason being, as you put out in the first few minutes when you asked, I think, Tash, how you define a job. If you can't come to an agreement in terms of how you define a job, then how do you measure a cost per job? The cost side is, for us as a funder, is much easier because we've got budgeting tools. We ask you to break down your expenditure. We monitor all of that so we can break down what you're actually spending on to get a certain outcome. But the question then becomes, what is that outcome? And there's a huge difference in terms of what those outcomes are when you look at that side of that cost per job equation. So I think it's a question that we would love to have easy answers to, but unfortunately we do have to have nuanced conversations. But to be simple, I mentioned earlier that across our jobs fund portfolio, we've got an average cost per job of 28,000 total cost per job. So that's inclusive of the grant funding and the cost that the partner has brought on board, so what they've spent. But to tell you the truth, that's just an average. The cost per job varies across the different initiatives. Some initiatives have a strong emphasis on high-tech skilling, for example. So then the cost will be much higher when you compare it to projects where the youngsters are only being upskilled in terms of soft skills. Some projects have an infrastructure development component. So again, would love to have easy answers, but I think you actually need to have a more nuanced approach. I don't know if other panelists want to venture a different view.
Yeah, I'd like to venture a different view, if it's okay, Nick. I think it's a question of how do you define the job created? It can be, are you looking at jobs created for one day, and I would say I've created a job, like short-term jobs? Are you looking at jobs created for 12 months, like a yes work experience? Are you looking at jobs created post 12 months when you're talking now on a permanent job? It depends on what you're really trying to create. And what you're trying to create depends on how much you spend. I've had many arguments from, I know Michael and Susan Dell Foundation says that any amount more than 15,000 rands is too expensive in creating a job. And they have huge, strong arguments around that. But I also know the Jobs Fund has average creation of jobs is 28,000. And if you look at YES, for example, it's sitting at an average of 50,000 plus, if I'm correct, in terms of.
That's with salaries, hey?
That's with the stipend. If you take away the stipend, it's far less.
It's actually, if you claim the ETI, it's 38,000.
38,000. So it's nuanced in terms of the big question is what are you really creating, and the definition of what you're creating then determines whether the efficiency or effectiveness of that would then apply. I think what we should be asking more is, are we creating sustainable jobs? Are we ensuring effective transition, to empowered individuals who have the confidence and character to be able to thrive in an economy post that job created? I think that's really the real question, so that they don't jump back into the unemployment market and the cycle continues overall. And so it's very nuanced, and I would agree with on that.
Thank you. We are out of time, and unfortunately this is a big topic and there's not a lot of time. So I'm hoping that there will be opportunities to engage people through networking and through further conversations, which is part of the role of the conference. I just want a closing comment from each of you, and just asking one very simple question. Corporates are encouraged to spend money on enterprise and supply development. They are encouraged to participate in the YES program. They're encouraged to innovate. What would your short advice be to a company that's listening to you now around working in the space around job creation? If you just give a closing perspective on that. Tash, would you like to kick off on that?
It's about integrating your spend. I think when companies try to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, they do a small enterprise and supply development project here and another skills development project there. There's just so much duplication of administration that the money is not going down to the actual user. And there are a lot of intermediary agencies in the space that suck huge amounts of this cash into their own administration. And we don't see this going down to the beneficiary level. I think if corporates can start to think very cleverly about integrating the ESD, the SD, the supplier points, all of it together, and there is a way to do this. If you take a supply chain and you build the SMEs in there and you place the Yes Youth in there and you build their skills in there, you really have something that is sustainable and strategically relevant to your business. If you want the spend to be long-term and have real impact, it can't be disconnected from your business strategy. And there are clever ways to do this.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything in addition to that?
I do think it's about transformation, a transformative approach. I know corporates are often afraid of the broad-based Black economic empowerment objectives and what it tends to achieve. I do think that if you combine broad-based Black economic empowerment with your strategic business objectives, real transformation will take place. Because everything you're doing, like Tasha said, because that's integrating, you're not complying, it's not for compliance purposes, but you're now intentionally, building a business that is going to lead to transformation and then intentionally create jobs. It is possible. We've seen it happen through a lot of Africa Tikkun partners who are doing the right thing because it makes business sense.
Great, thank you. And Fidelis, just a closing comment from you on that point?
Yeah, so I think our own experience is that when we try to partner with corporates, we've missed each other when our incentives weren't aligned. Often those partnerships are on the back of tick box exercises on the side of corporates. So if I've got something to say to corporates, it is that they have to understand that transformation is a business imperative. The challenges we have in terms of poverty, inequality, they will have an impact on their own sustainability and profitability in the long term. So I think that's the one message I would give to corporate South Africa. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I must just thank the three of you for participating in this panel. There wasn't enough time to take it to all the questions. The comments and the questions will be pulled into a discussion note on the session. And to those that are listening, there is a networking sessions. The panelists, I think, are available to go through and be there. So if you have specific questions or you'd like to engage any of these panelists around particular issues, there should be an opportunity to do that. And yeah, just thank you from Trilog's perspective in participating in this very rich discussion. I'm just sorry there wasn't enough time to unpack it in any greater depth, but thank you.